Again and again, we're seeing this theme. She had just that kernel enough of faith. This part of the story always gets me choked up. I'm Reverend Amanda Sue, and in this video, we'll be exploring a Bible story about healing and wholeness. Now, whenever you dive into a Bible story or really any historical text, you always have to start with understanding the context and putting yourself in the shoes of the people for whom this story was originally written. I don't know if you guys watch the show The Office with Steve Carell. Parkour! I love that show. I think it's hilarious. Did you know there's also a UK version? I think it actually came first, and it's the same premise, the same show essentially. I do not find the UK Office funny.
Cracking up.
Now, I'm American. That show is made for British people. We speak the same language, and yet there is such a big culture gap that the UK Office doesn't make any sense to me. I just don't get it. And so that's the key here when we're looking at the Bible, is the culture matters. And in that scenario, we share the same language. But in the Bible, most of it was written in either Hebrew or Greek. And then when we get into the Gospels and the words that Jesus said, he was likely speaking Aramaic. And so we've got multiple translations going on. It's also a completely different time period, a completely different part of the world, different technology, different politics, everything's different. Understanding context is absolutely key. So today we're going to be looking at the story of the Hemorrhaging Woman. This is a Jesus healing story that's often referred to as the woman with the flow of blood. So this story appears in all three synoptic gospels. The Gospels in the Bible are telling the story of Jesus. There's 4 of them: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So today I'm going to be using the version of the Hemorrhaging Woman story in Mark's Gospel, which is in chapter 5, verses 25 to 34. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, for she said, "If I but touch his cloak, I will be made well." Immediately her flow of blood stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my cloak?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." Okay, so let's talk about what we know. The story says that the woman was suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years. Now, it doesn't say explicitly, but tradition states that this was menstrual related. And honestly, what else could it be? I do not think that she was suffering from a bloody nose for 12 years. We also know that this woman was Jewish. Now, it doesn't say that in the story, but based on where this story is within the rest of the gospel and the timeline, scholars say that they are most likely in Capernaum or near Capernaum, which was a Jewish town, and so this woman would have been Jewish. In order to really understand the depth of this story, we have to start by understanding what this would mean for a Jewish woman in the 1st century to be suffering from menstrual blood for 12 years. In the Jewish tradition at the time, there was a huge emphasis on cleanliness and purity. Now, this wasn't just about like washing away germs. This was a religious or ritual purity that they believed was essential for keeping you right with God. So it says in Leviticus that if a woman is menstruating or has any type of flow of blood, if she sits on a chair, the chair is unclean. And if anybody else comes along afterward and sits on that chair, they are also unclean. Now, to be unclean in this context means that you are separated from God, you are separated from religious and society life in general. Because she wouldn't have wanted to transfer her uncleanliness onto anybody else, that means that she couldn't live at home with her family. She wouldn't have been able to prepare them food. She wouldn't have been able to work. She wouldn't have been able to enter a house of worship. So for 12 years, not only did she have this physical illness, but she was likely a complete outcast from society, likely poor and completely on her own with nobody willing to help her or even touch her. The other thing that we're told right in the beginning of this story is that she had spent all she had on physicians, and not only did they not make it better, she actually got worse. Now, the Talmud, which was the Jewish authority, would have prescriptions in it for how to treat different types of illnesses and diseases. Some of them are like really sus tonics and mixtures and potions that could make you super sick or maybe even kill you, but definitely didn't help her. Others of the prescriptions were basically superstition, like carrying around the ashes of an ostrich egg in a linen cloth. These would be the types of things that physicians would have tried to help her with. So at this point, this woman likely thinks that she is incurable because she has done everything that the authorities of the time have said will help her, and nothing is helping. Hopefully you can see already how key it is to understand the context of the story. Knowing about the impurity and the uncleanliness that was saturating the culture at the time, and how it would have impacted this woman's life, not just in a physical way, but she was emotionally, mentally, spiritually, completely disconnected from all of society, her family, and everything that's important in life. Now that you've got a little bit more of the context and the background, let's go through and break this verse down. Okay, so it says that she's been suffering for 12 years. 12 in the Bible is the number for completeness and order. So another way that you could look at reading this was that she had been suffering completely. But blood also has deeper significance. Just on the surface level, think about how we use the word blood today, like blood of my blood. That's for my Outlander fans.
Blood of my blood.
So blood can mean our ancestry, our kin, what makes us who we are. From a metaphysical perspective, blood can also mean like life itself, like vitality, energy, life flowing through me, what animates my existence. So saying that she was hemorrhaging blood is like saying she was hemorrhaging everything that made her who she was. She was losing life. She was drained. Okay, and then we're told that she endured a lot under the care of physicians, that she spent all that she had, and not only did nothing help make her better, but she actually got worse. Now, some of us do not have to do a lot of imagining to picture what that would be like. To go to a doctor with a very real complaint of something that is draining the life out of us, and go to doctor after doctor and pay copay after copay and not get any solutions or any relief. Unfortunately, 2,000 years and some things haven't changed a whole lot. Now, metaphysically, physicians can represent our attempts to use our own human understanding to fix problems, focusing on surface level symptoms rather than getting to the deeper root cause. And so a way that you can look at this verse is that this woman suffered the life draining out of her. She suffered completely. And that she tried all of the ways of the world to try and fix it. She tried to manage the symptoms, but things got worse because she wasn't getting to the root cause of the problem. So in this translation, she says, "If I but touch his cloak, I will be made well." Other translations have it a bit different, where instead of "I will be made well," it's "I will be made whole." And the Greek word that's translated as well or whole most often in the Bible is actually translated as saved. So she is saying, if I can just touch his cloak, not only will I be made well, I will be made whole. I will be saved. My suffering will end. I will be restored to wholeness by touching the hem of his cloak. Okay, now what does the hem mean and what's the significance of that? In the Bible, and especially in unity metaphysics, there's a distinction between Jesus, the man, and Christ, the ideal version of humanity that is in God's mind that we all have implanted in us and can unfold. So there's a difference between Jesus the person and the Christ. Jesus the person lived in a particular time and place. The Christ is eternal. The way that Charles Fillmore would typically interpret this is that touching the hem of Christ's cloak, of Christ's garment, is touching even the outer edges of that Christ consciousness that lives within us. And so you might say that she knew if she could just touch that consciousness, even just the edges of it, she would be restored to wholeness. So then it says she comes up from behind Jesus in the crowd. Now, the crowd metaphysically represents the collective consciousness. So all of the fears, doubts, and the human understanding of this generation, of this time period. So think about the level of perseverance that it would take and the level of courage to be able to push through a crowd. The other thing that's important is remember that tradition at the time would have said that she was unclean, and anything or anyone that she touched would be made unclean as well. So as she's pushing her way through that crowd, she is making everybody around her unclean, and she is reaching out and touching Jesus, which would make him unclean. Again and again, we're seeing this theme. We've got the crowd representing the collective unconscious, what the world believes, what we're identified with of what's possible and not possible. We have the physicians who represent trying to use our human intellect and our human understanding to solve problems, but that only leads to touching the surface and not getting to the deeper root issue. And then we have this current understanding of these people about impurity and uncleanliness, and how this woman who is unclean pushing through the crowd would transfer her uncleanliness onto everybody else, but instead it gets flipped on its head. And instead, when she touches Jesus, she doesn't make him unclean the way the world would say. It makes her clean. It restores her wholeness. So there's this theme going on in this story about being identified with what the world says is possible, what the world says is true, or being identified with a deeper spiritual truth and a deeper understanding. I want to talk a little bit about how New Thought and other traditions look at the word disease and look at understanding healing. So a really common way to say disease in spiritual circles is dis-ease. So essentially saying that to experience disease is to be in dis-ease, to be out of harmony with the spiritual truth of who you are. Disease is not a punishment. It's not a reprimand or something that you have to suffer with because you sinned. Rather, it is a symptom of you being out of alignment in some way with your divine spiritual truth. Now, many New Thought teachers, including Unity's co-founders Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, would say that all disease, all illness, starts with thoughts in mind. Now look, I don't know if I'm completely on board with that, right? I think things are complicated. I think that what we think and the thoughts that we hold in mind absolutely influence disease and illness and body. I mean, I think at this point, this has been empirically proven that our mindset makes a difference. I don't know if I'm ready to go so far as saying that every single illness starts with some incorrect thought we're holding on to, mostly because it's just not helpful. But what I will get behind is that what this is assuming is that our natural state, our true state, is perfect health and perfect wholeness. Sometimes healing is more about our inner consciousness and the way we relate to what's going on in our bodies than what's actually going on in our bodies. To be healed metaphysically means to be put back into that right alignment with the divine. It is to realize and express our inherent wholeness, that the truth of who we are is perfect health and perfect wholeness. That is our divine identity. And healing is us remembering that and claiming that and expressing it. And that's what we're seeing is happening in this story, is that even though she had suffered, she had just that kernel enough of faith to push through the collective unconscious, to reach out and touch the divine light within her and realize wholeness in that moment, because she never wasn't whole. This next line is kind of interesting because it says that Jesus is aware the power had gone forth from him. There's a lot of different ways to look at this. Charles Fillmore would have said that it was true spiritual energy that left him and went into her body to heal her. The way I look at it is Jesus as a conduit, just like we all are, for that divine light, for that healing energy. Jesus was just a perfect conduit who allowed that to happen. It's not that she was taking something from him. So then Jesus is asking his disciples, who touched my cloak? And I can just imagine the disciples looking at him like, dude, you're in a crowd. There are so many people touching you right now. What do you even mean, who touched me? Lots of people are touching you. So the importance of this line is that it starts transitioning us into figuring out what exactly is it that happened here. Because it's pointing out the fact that this woman was not the only person who touched him. And yet she was the only one who was healed. So what's the significance of that? In a way, it's almost showing that it's not some magical property of Jesus. He's not a magic object that you just touch it and receive healing power. It's starting to invite us into this exploration for ourselves to deeper understand this story. Then it says he's looking around for who did it, and then the woman comes forward. She comes forward in fear and trembling and falls down by his feet. I think this is so powerful. This part of the story always gets me choked up. This says to me that even though she had enough faith to do what the world says she wasn't supposed to do, that she was healed. And yet still, all of the echoes of society and culture and what she's been taught to believe, even though she witnessed this miracle for herself, that collective unconscious stuff is still so strong that she's afraid. Because if you think about it, this would have been an offensive thing for her to do to Jesus. And so she's worried. She's worried that she's going to be reprimanded because that's what everybody else had been doing to her for 12 years. And so even though that is so strong in her, she still, that little bit of faith that she had was enough for a complete and immediate healing. So then Jesus calls her daughter. I can't. Because if you think about a woman being ostracized from her family, from society, from religious life, from everything, just being completely downtrodden for 12 years, like an invisible beggar sitting on the street who nobody dared get near. And in that moment, Jesus, this pinnacle, this a renowned teacher and healer, the Messiah, this person of such great importance, looks at her and calls her daughter. Because remember that this wasn't just a physical illness, it was a separation from her community. So by calling her daughter, Jesus is claiming her as kin to the Jewish community and is restoring her to her community. So he's making a statement. And he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." And this is the key for our understanding, is that it wasn't that Jesus did this miracle that only he could do. It was that this woman's faith, her belief, her conviction is what made her well. So metaphysics tells us that there are multiple parts to healing. Number one is to know and to recognize that in spiritual truth, the truth of who we are is perfect health and perfect wholeness. Then we have our experience in the human condition, where things don't always feel or show up as healthy and whole. And so step number one, what we have to do is realign our human consciousness, our ego and our intellect with that deeper spiritual truth, that energy, that healing light of Christ is always there, always present. The reason this woman was healed and the others in the crowd weren't was not because God picks and chooses. It was because of her, because she opened that channel through faith to allow that to happen. Okay, now you don't have to look at this story as a literal physical healing to be able to find the benefit for you today. Some reflection questions I want to invite you to explore for yourself. Think about suffering for 12 years. How hard would it be to keep faith that you could ever be happy again? So as you reflect on that, then reflect on the courage and the perseverance and the willingness to step forward in faith even after all that time. To have suffered for so long, to be hopeless that there's anything that anyone can do for you to make you better, and yet you're still choosing to move forward. What might it mean to reach out in faith? What area of your life are you suffering from dis-ease, of feeling like there is discord or hatred or a lack of understanding or a lack of harmony? What might it look like in that situation to reach out and touch that higher consciousness? Oftentimes we start with the ego. We start with our human selves to try and solve all of our problems in the ways that make sense, right? And it's only when all of that fails that we turn to a deeper understanding. So where in your life are physicians failing you? Where is worldly human intellect and knowledge failing you? Because perhaps that's your invitation. What would it feel like if all in one moment the situation that is on your heart and on your mind that is causing you this dis-ease were healed. So I want to invite you to take these reflection questions into your journaling or meditation practice. Allow this story to sit with you and see what else comes up for you as you ponder this idea of healing and faith and being restored to wholeness. I hope you enjoyed our metaphysical interpretation and deep dive into the Hemorrhaging Woman story. Check back next week for some more videos and let me know in the comments if there are any specific verses in the Bible or specific stories that you would like me to do next. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Love you. Bye.